A pleasure to me all at last, and now we are at it once again with this particular corner. Now, when I talk about this corner, well, you can pretty much see. Yeah, so that's pretty much what this is. But keep in mind, when I started this season of films I should have talked about years ago, this was actually where I started things off until the holidays started to roll in and the whole room had to be set up with some unique decorations. And this corner did, believe it or not, end up as the #1 candidate spot for a tree. But now that all that is done, and we're basically into our second week of February, I can at least let you guys know that we're going to have a lot more to cover for films I should have talked about years ago. And I plan on going through at least a few more weeks worth of this stuff. So, without further ado, we'll just go on ahead and get through a bunch of films that I've been watching, and it'll pretty much make things a breeze. Not just for making the episodes, but for getting them all edited, rendered, and uploaded in an orderly fashion. I might as well start things off here, for the month at least, with a certain sci-fi series centering on robotic cyborgs bent on annihilation, but at first using time travel as a means to eliminate their opposition. I'm of course talking about the metal menace known as the Terminator. Yeah, so there's a lot of films in this whole series here, and with a good majority of people wanting me to talk about the Terminator in great depth, I might as well take up the opportunity to cover this series. Although for now, I'll focus on the first 3 because those are, after all, what I am most familiar with. When it comes to the Terminator films, the first one is without a doubt one of the big reasons why James Cameron was launched into stardom. And while it wasn't his first work, it was one of his first major breakthroughs. And for 1984, a year that was already busy with such things like Transformers, and there was even the likes of Toxic Avenger. Yeah, Lloyd Kaufman. Maybe I'll get to that some other time. Anyways though, the Terminator follows along in the futuristic year of 2029. Yeah, only a few years from now. So we could only imagine how that'll turn out in real life. In any case though, it centers on the year 1984. Essentially the present. Not only when the film came out, but the setting as well. The Terminator actually lands in a unique energetic field, which apparently is how beings that go through time travel via a so-called time displacement equipment. The Terminator, of course, is sent back to the year 1984 via time displacement equipment as it's generally regarded. A garbage truck driver does not notice about this and even freaks out because of the so-called lightning that's in the area. Well anyways, the Terminator is played by the one and only Arnold Schwarzenegger, a man whom has already been well known because of his heavyweight championship, especially throughout the 70s. And up until this very point where he was in one of his biggest acting debuts, and also one of his most prominent in history, you could say he sure came in fully prepared. Because not only is he sporting his muscular look, but he's also fully nude. Apparently the lore states that time displacement equipment apparently will incinerate most synthetic objects. They of course can relate to anything like clothing or weapons or tools, essentially anything that's organic, including entire bodies of persons, can in fact be sent through with little issue. And this is also why we get to see one of our other characters sent back in time, known as Kyle Reese. They're both fully nude when they enter 1984, and basically they both go through a lot of hoops just to obtain some clothes and try to blend in with the crowd until they can both figure out what to do. In the case of the Terminator, he encounters a group of thugs and at first plays along with their jokes and eventually attacks the crap out of them, and man is he in He's quite the killing machine. This, of course, not only sets the tone for the rest of the film, but it also explains to us Terminators mean business. They feel no pity, remorse, or fear, and they will not stop at anything until their mission is complete. A quote that we eventually hear later on in the film. Either way you look at it though, in terms of Kyle Reese, he at first gets some pants from a hobo, chased by some cops, breaks into a department store, and manages to sneak out, grabbing a shotgun along the way from a nearby patrol car. So, he's had a lot more to deal with as opposed to the Terminator, whom all he had to do was deal with some thugs in the middle of the night and out in some sort of quiet space. Meanwhile, for Reese though, he was thankfully able to get out of there in one piece and with everything he needed. Clothes, weapons, and he also would eventually get a hold of a car by which he would hotwire. But we do get to see a flashback which ironically takes place in the future, which is pretty much where he was from. We get to see a lot of incredible effects take place here, some of which are practical and some of which were on the digitized levels, especially with the unique lasers that are emitted from their weapons. Because after all, in the future, everybody is using phased plasma rifles, not only in a way to disable the Terminators, but also take on most of the other supersized equipment. There's T-1s, massive battle tanks, hunter-killers, which take place in the form of various aircraft, as well as other armored machinery. And we definitely can't forget the Terminators themselves. One of the most prominent models out there are the T-800s. The T-800s are seen as the most advantageous and the most prominent models in the entirety of Skynet. Yeah, basically, Skynet is seen as the company which was established by the government as a means to keep people safe and happy. The advantageous form of technology supposedly went rogue and ended up causing a massive amount of chaos. More specifically, the date takes place in 1997. An infamous point in history called Judgment Day supposedly led to the annihilation of almost all of humanity via nuclear bombs, warheads that were launched by Skynet themselves. And as a means to take on the rest of the resistance, the rest of humanity that was still alive after the initial blast took place, Skynet would start developing a series of robotic soldiers which were simply called Terminators. Of course, each model would vary in shape and size, and there were dozens of them that lore has produced. We not only had the T-800s, which were the best at the time, but there was also T-700s, 600s, 500s, 400s, and there's plenty of other models out there that even the Terminator wiki page happens to explain to us about. In any case though, Reese hotwires his car, and the Terminator finds himself a car as well, and eventually a phone book that lists out 3 names, Sarah Connor being in each one of them. But they're all slightly different from each other, usually having the middle initial to distinguish the bunch. He pays visit to one of the 3 Sarah Connors and ends up busting down her door and gunning her down with a newly acquired hardball pistol. That's because he had actually visited a gun shop requesting that he'd have a Franke 12-gauge shotgun, a hardballer pistol with a laser sight on top, and even an Uzi. He even went ahead to straight up shoot down the clerk after they discussed how things would work based on transactions and whatnot. I mean, this is the kind of film in which that reality might not apply very well. And also because the shop owner was killed anyways, it wouldn't have made much sense to try and dawdle on that subject. So they were good on the pacing, and even by the writing perspective, they did good with the owner being casual on the fact that the Terminator was just some guy looking to get a hold of some weapons for himself, no matter what the reason may be. Yeah, that's kind of what's dangerous about some people owning guns, let alone getting their hands on them. In any case though, when all is said and done, we do get to see one of our more prominent protagonist characters, Sarah Connor. Yeah, even though I mentioned that there were 3 of them, and one had already been killed, another one was also said to be killed at some point. And the third, Sarah Connor, she apparently works as a waitress at a restaurant and has a difficult time doing so as well. She unfortunately just doesn't seem to have that good of a life. But little did she realize, she apparently would be the next fate for humanity, being basically the #1 target by Skynet. One night in particular, Kyle Reese is out and about doing his patrols when he eventually finds Sarah Connor, follows her casually, trying not to let himself get detected, but she of course becomes suspicious of him basically stalking. So she goes to a place called Tech Noir, which is basically a nightclub in the town, and eventually Reese and the Terminator follow suit, both of whom don't end up paying for admission, but Sarah herself did. All because she had to go to her phone and call up her friend Ginger. Yeah, there was a couple scenes in which that showcased her and her friends, not just Ginger, but a few others as well. She hadn't realized it yet, but her friends were also killed as well by the Terminator, as we do see at some point earlier on. But when it all comes down to, the Terminator has his eyes set on Sarah, his pistol's whipped out, the laser's pointed right between her eyes, then Reese pumps up and fires his shotgun blast at the Terminator. And if you think that's not crazy, just wait. A car chase begins to take place. They, of course, get to know each other, and while Sarah tries to make her way out of there, believing that Reese is like the Terminator as well, they're both out there trying to hunt her. But Reese himself, unwilling to back down in spite of his youth, does explain to Sarah who he is, what his intentions are, and more importantly, what does the Terminator want with her. As stated before, the Terminator is somebody who will never stop until Sarah herself is killed. And basically, the preemptive birthing of John Connor would be aborted by the Terminator himself. Reese, of course, is sent out and about by the Resistance, John Connor himself being the leader. Yeah, so when you really think about it, Sarah Connor really is someone else. You might think that she's had a crappy, generic, boring life, but apparently it's about to change. Because being the supposed mother of the future resistance leader for humanity's survival in the future, that's really quite the fate to put together. And more importantly, how exactly does she bear so much connection to which? And even more so, how does John Connor become conceived? If Sarah is supposed to be the mother, then who is the father? Well, after a few more things happen, including a little trouble with the police, they do eventually find their way to a motel, out of which they apparently do create a conception. Because not only we have ourselves John Connor in the mix, at least from what we can understand that's possible as to what could happen, Terminator, of course, continues to come back. Even after all the car chases, all the gunfights, and all the other things, evading from him was one thing, but having him come back yet again after his own little skirmishes take place, including where he removes parts of himself. Yeah, it's at this moment where you realize that because of the way he sticks a scalpel in his arm or into his eyeball, it's so gruesome that it would make a lot of people cringe. And I know, that word's not very useful today. But that's exactly what it would have been, because the practical effects they used in that instance, in both ways, just looks terrible. And it can really make you feel just as much in pain as Arnold himself probably would when he actually would have stuck the scalpel in both of these spots. I mean, when you think about it, these are just artificial things that they had in order to make the Terminator parts look realistic. It was unique that they had metal rods to resemble the servo mechanics that operate the Terminator's fingers, and of course, a red eye, basically being the optical piece for the T-800 himself. In any case, though, Kyle and Sarah create a bunch of pipe bombs at home in an effort to hopefully blow up the T-800, because Kyle apparently knows that explosive devices are enough to basically put the T-800 out of commission, or at the very least disable him in a way that he's blown to pieces. And it's true that T-800s, like most Terminator models, were not exactly made as unique, in spite of the model series as being different from one another and having different faces or identities to distinguish them apart. The Model 101 class is exactly what Arnold Schwarzenegger looks like and is designed off of. So that's apparently the most unique bits that we can think of here. Of course, even when they do bust out their pipe bombs, in another chase that goes on between a pickup and a motorcycle, which eventually allows for the Terminator to fall off his motorcycle and then get smashed by an incoming tanker truck. Oh man, that's just as brutal as seeing what happened to him earlier when he was sticking the scalpel in places he shouldn't be. Well, he does take out the driver and tells the passenger of the truck to get out. And when he turns the truck around and slams right into the pickup, Kyle and Sarah are pretty much injured by the impact and the flyover that happened, where they were able to flip their pickup upside down. But in one last act of defiance from Kyle, he tosses the last remaining pipe bomb into the exhaust port of the tanker, causing it to blow up. The T-800 is pretty much cooked to a crisp in that wake of that massive inferno, but all it does is strip him down to nothing but his entire endoskeleton. That's all we have here. And once again, the practical effects, while they are pretty good for the time, one thing that's not so great here is the stop motion they use by ways of getting the Terminator to move. Apparently that is how he was able to move on the fast side, but on the slow side they do have him as a massive animatronic, and he does seemingly looks and moves in a realistic manner, which they did pretty well on that part. The creative team especially has a lot of notoriety in their work. Well, in any case though, an old warehouse, a manufacturing plant, is the final showdown between the three characters. Kyle unfortunately manages to plant another explosive into Terminator, causing him to basically split in half from the blast. And even though Sarah gets hit with some shrapnel in the leg, she's able to crawl away from there, even as the T-800 is still online and chasing her. And even though he backs her in a corner with his hand grasped around her neck, she activates the nearby hydraulic press, causing it to slam down on the Terminator and permanently shut it down. Kyle unfortunately succumbed to his injuries, while Sarah thankfully made it out alive with the Terminator no more. So I guess you can say the script was flipped on him. Sarah, of course, never did stop until it was dead, and not the other way around. Kind of a way to twist fate here, but also a unique climax, complete with Sarah dropping an F-bomb. Either way you look at it though, the epilogue does show her driving off, pregnant, and inside a red Jeep. And in all honesties, the story here ends in a pretty unique manner. They probably could have just left this one out alone, because after all, Sarah having John means that she's not only going to be a mother, but also she's going to teach him the ways of how to survive when Judgment Day occurs in 1997. But as we know, that didn't really happen. And 7 years after the first film came out, a sequel would show up and seemingly would do even better than the first one did. I, of course, will talk about that one tomorrow, but if you want to see more, go down to my channel. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side for more